So India's GDP has fallen to 5.4%. Now this is a very dismal growth rate for a growing economy like India, and this is going to have serious repercussions on our economy going forward, on the investment climate. If you have money in the Indian stock market or any form of investment in India, this video becomes really important. There are 3-4 central questions that will come. That number one is to why the India's GDP is growing so slowly. What is the difference between like a 7% growth rate which was estimated by RBI itself and 5.4%? So ऐसा क्या फर्क पड़ गया in 1.5% difference? Second key important question is that what impact is it going to have on the Indian stock market / your investments? Very important point. And third and finally, what is the economic strength looks like going forward? So I'm going to give you my take, and let's start the story by understanding India and China's growth story. So in the year around 1960, both India and China were similar sized economy. The nature of our economy was primarily agrarian, which means that we were mostly farmers. But in the last 50 odd years, China has leapfrogged. Now the total GDP of China is approximately $19 trillion and India's GDP is somewhere around like $4 trillion. So there has been almost a 5x difference between India and China now. So then a natural question comes that, okay, what did China exactly do to leapfrog and why can't we do it? So here is a very important LinkedIn post I did on this topic, and I'll just take you through my take on this entire situation. So the post is that India spends roughly $12 billion, only $12 billion to educate roughly 1.4 billion people. Now, if we look at China, that over the last few decades, they have been spending a lot of money in education. And to give you some numbers, China spends roughly $900 billion to educate the same, approximately 1.4 billion population. So India, $12 billion, and China is spending roughly $900 billion in terms of educating their populace. Then again, a lot of counter questions will start here, और China की size is very big, GDP is very big. So इससे क्या फर्क पड़ गया? Well, फर्क ये पड़ गया कि for example, if you look at the recent stats, then what is it that we are able to uncover? Well, as a percentage of our GDP, we are only spending 4.6% on education. China, on the other hand, despite having almost a 99% literacy rate, they still spend 10% plus of their GDP on education. Now, this indicates the priority of the governments. I'm not taking a dig at any government. I'm just generally presenting you this picture. This is one of the foremost reasons why we are lacking in innovation, why we are unable to be competitive. Whatever limited resources we have, we kind of splurge that away in terms of demanding for more reservation, demanding like Ladli Beta, Ladla Beta, Yojana and all that stuff. And this is getting us nowhere. And as a result, now we are in a situation where that despite being a low income country, we are only growing at 5.4%. अब सवाल आता है कि अच्छा, RBI had said it earlier that we will grow at 7%, we have hit 5.4%. What big deal? What that 1.5% difference means? At what rate was China growing? China is still growing slowly. So there are a set of points that you need to understand, and let me tell you the entire story by talking about 8 very specific points. I would request you to understand all 8 of these points really well. Watch the video till the very end. This is useful content that will ultimately impact you. Don't skip these type of videos. Share it with your friends. You yourself will be able to understand whatever is going in our country in a more holistic manner. So point number one is that we need to understand truly the difference between a growth model which China has adopted. And by the way, I'm not approving of China's growth story or any of that stuff, but there are certain key things that we can learn. So let's first compare India and China. And there are 3 critical points that you need to understand in terms of India's and China's economy. The first key point is that China has been consistently exporting more compared to its import. For example, when China exports, let's say $120 worth of good, they are only importing $100. Now that is creating good wealth in China. That is actually creating a more prosperous society. They are increasing their wealth. And now a natural question comes, क्या India में भी होगा ये किसी समय पे जाके and all that stuff. Indian government is also working very hard. So let's look at hard data, right? So for example, here you will see that if we look at the China story from 1960 all the way till 2005, the number or the export minus import difference was close to 0. In fact, एक point पे this used to be negative, right? But since the last 15-20 odd years, they have been able to increase the gap between exports minus imports. So this has become a positive number and it is generating real wealth, right? Now, this is the goal of any prosperous society, that you export more compared to import. हमारा argument ये शुरू हो जाता है that you know what, okay, we are 1.4 billion population, of course we need like more energy, we need to import more, we are consuming more, our base is increasing, our per capita GDP is increasing. Okay, so यहाँ पे नहीं हो रही थी per capita GDP increase, यहाँ पे नहीं हो रही थी per capita GDP increase, but they are actually on a positive trajectory. Now, what about India? Well, ये रहा India का data, right? And as a percentage of GDP, you will see that we have been at best 0%. 1975 पे हम 0% थे, एक्सपोर्ट माइनस इंपोर्ट, फिर नेगेटिव होते चले गए एंड अभी भी वी आर एट नेगेटिव. सो देयर इज नो पॉजिटिव ट्रैजेक्टरी दैट इज गेटिंग फॉर्म्ड हियर. सो दिस इज पॉइंट नंबर 1 एंड अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट. हम लोग यही सोचते रह जाते हैं कि भाई हमारी वेल्थ क्यों नहीं बढ़ रही है ऑन पर कैपिटा जीडीपी बेसिस. दिस इज द रीजन व्हाई दैट चाइना हैज बीन सक्सेसफुल इन टर्म्स ऑफ क्रिएटिंग सम काइंड ऑफ कंपेटिटिव एडवांटेज व्हेन इट कम्स टू एक्सपोर्टिंग स्टफ compared to imports. But in India currently we don't have any such sustained advantage, and as a result we have been consistently importing more compared to our exports. Now, point number 2 regarding India, China and why India's economy is currently struggling is very simple, and it has to do with the fact that India is unable to migrate from a low income country to a middle income country. Now, what is the meaning of that? So approximately 60% of our workforce still depends on agriculture. Now, agriculture is a low value adding component of our economy. I mean it in the nicest way possible. This is what economists tell us, that if you are an agriculture or agrarian based society, then you export commodities, right? आपने आटा, चावल, दाल, इस तरीके की चीजें you have exported. It's basic only. You are not selling the value added products. But on the flip side, if you look at economies like the US, then they are exporting what? They are exporting tech, which is a very high value added service. Or all of us are using like Google, Meta in some form. We are using WhatsApp, etc., right? So we are consumers of tech. A natural question comes that, okay, why is India unable to do that? Well, उसका बहुत simple सा answer आता है. Again, going back to the first point that I was telling, that in India, education levels are low and we are not genuinely focusing on improving our education quality. So as a result, we get a very subpar force. In fact, जो लोग अच्छे होते हैं वो बाहर निकल जाते हैं, right? And they end up becoming like CEOs, CFOs of big Fortune 500 companies working for other nations. Now, can I show you some data? Absolutely. So let's take a look at this data again, and what you will notice is, in fact, मैं आपको बहुत अच्छा एक data दिखाता हूँ. So this is India's literacy rate from 1981 to 2022. मैं आपको एक चीज दिखाऊंगा यहाँ पे, right? So focus on this part, that at one point in time around 2006, our total literacy rate was 62%, right? Now, in the last approximately 16 years, we have been able to go to 76%. So from 62 all the way till 76%. Now, ये 62 से 76 around वाली jump China ने कितनी जल्दी करी थी, right? So let me show you that data also. So 62 के आसपास का data यहाँ पे था in 1982 in China. They were able to do this in 8 years, right? Now, again, this is political party agnostic. चाहे वो कांग्रेस हो, चाहे वो बीजेपी हो, चाहे वो XYZ party हो, the focus of politicians is not education at all. Why? Because having poorly educated populace or poorly educated citizens actually benefits a type of agenda that all political parties are running, and this is very unfortunate. Now, why is that? So this brings us to the second key, very important point that you must know about India's GDP right now, which is that what exactly is the focus of our economy, right? Is it like improving road infrastructure, this, that? कोई आपको कोई कहानी सुना देता है, कोई बोल देता है वंदे भारत निकाल दी हमने, कोई बोलता है हम बुलेट ट्रेन निकालने वाले हैं, कोई बोलता है कि भाई हम तो because the world is using UPI, so India has become number one in tech. So what exactly is happening? So there are 3 central undercurrents which are happening in the Indian economy, right? So number 1 is that we don't care about being competitive. For example, if I ask you that what is the competitive advantage of India, you will say that, okay, we are great in tech. Are we really, right? I mean, what phone are you using? You probably are using iPhone or Android. वो India में बने नहीं. Similarly, you will say कि अच्छा, maybe like, you know, manufacturing, right? We are great at. Really, right? I mean, we are losing war to like Vietnam, so to say. और बांग्लादेश में manufacturing होने लग गए जूते चप्पलों की. When it comes to manufacturing, neither we are competitive there. We are not competitive in tech. What was our winning advantage? Why cities like Hyderabad or Bangalore came up? Well, it was because of our IT workforce, that we had Indians who are hardworking, who are able to slog like 10-12 hours a day, do not charge crazy amount of money, are reasonably well educated, can speak English. This led to the rise of cities. What do you think is the competitive advantage of TCS or Infosys? Well, it's very simple, that you hire intelligent, cheap labor, right? And an American, if you're paying like, let's say $500 an hour, here to an Indian to do the same work, you can probably get it done at $100 an hour. So that is that rather was the competitive advantage of India. Now, what has started to happen now? Well, that competitive advantage has started to get eroded. Why? Because artificial intelligence has picked up. So a lot of work that could be automated is going away. Then comes a very uncertain future कि okay fine यार ये तो चीज़ निकल रही है हाथ से कि AI jobs is eating into our IT sector jobs. So what is that next big competitive advantage that India really has? Honestly, there is no concrete answer here. If you have this conversation with anyone, and I'm happy if you can let me know in the comments that what genuinely do you think is the competitive advantage that India has? Where is it that we can win? For example, America is winning the AI race. Are we winning AI race? Absolutely not. We are not even like in the race of AI. What about machine learning? What about cryptocurrencies? अभी तो एटमॉस्फेयर ये बना हुआ है कि क्रिप्टो करेंसीज आर सम काइंड ऑफ अ स्कैम, बैन कर दो. आर क्रिप्टो करेंसीज बैंड इन इंडिया? द शॉर्ट answer is no. There is just enough gray area, and anyone who speaks about crypto is probably like, doing something illegal. That's the impression that is given. But cryptocurrencies are not illegal in India, right? So to cut the long story short, we don't know what our competitive advantage is. So which brings us to the second key dynamics in our economy currently, that as a result, because there are a lot of smart, intelligent people, what do they have to do? Well, in order to build a career in AI, or cryptos or machine learning or any kind of tech, they mostly, or high-end tech, they move away. They have to go to like countries like US, or nowadays UAE is picking up, Portugal is picking up. So people try to make moves, and whoever can move, they eventually going up there. So a lot of talent leaves India. As a result, what is it that the government should be doing? Well, they should be solving this problem. But what problem are we actually solving? So, well, we are going and increasing our subsidy programs. For example, the last elections were the ones where most amount of money was spent on Ladli Beti, Ladla Beta Yojana. 80 crore of our population out of 140 crore depends on subsidized food grains. So we are actually living in two Indias. One India literally is dependent on social sector schemes. This is being pumped up as a voter bank or voter base, and they have no comfort or interest or that privilege to understand about taxation system, what good economics would be, etc., etc. And rest 2% of direct taxpayers are being beaten to death in terms of increase in taxation. In fact, the situation has become that now in the recent history that individual personal income tax has gone to the highest levels. So this brings us to point number 3 about the Indian economy, which is that where the results are. So these are the recent results, and you can see that India's economy has slowed down to roughly 5.4%. Now, these are very, very slow growth rates. Now, what is the meaning of 5.4% growth rate, and what impact is it going to have on the stock market? Let me have that conversation with you. See, basically, India's size is roughly $3.5 trillion of economy, which translates to roughly $3,500 billion. Okay. We were estimating that we will grow at 7%. When China was growing from a low-income country to a middle-income country, it was growing in double digits, right? So it was growing at least at 10%. We are growing at roughly 5.56%, right? अब मैं आपको 3% पे calculation दिखाता हूँ कि if the expected growth rate or our actual growth rate should be 10%, but we are growing at 7% or 5%. How much this 3% delta is going to mean, and what is the meaning of this 3% delta? So 3% of $3,500 billion is how much? Well, it's close to $100 billion. Now, here is a Google exercise that you can do. Just simply search for 10 biggest flagship schemes in India. जो government का outlay होता है on 10 biggest schemes. Well, it roughly comes out to be $25 billion in total. Okay. All top 10 schemes put together on yearly basis. So a difference of 3% is actually $100 billion, and they can subsidize our 10 flagship schemes for 4 years. And this is the amount of growth that we are missing due to bad policies. Number one being really low spent on education, no focus there, and even people have stopped bothering about it because 80-90 crore people literally depend on food grains. They are surviving hand to mouth. They have no interest left in better education, expecting better from politicians, etc., etc. Then comes the next point that, okay, will this situation change? Well, I don't know, right? The situation looks grim. Why am I saying it? Okay, pick the case study of Bihar, UP, Jharkhand. Now, these states, unfortunately, are probably the least developed space. No industrialists, business people actually want to set up industries here. Do you think people really bother? No. They actually pick up politicians who align with their religious beliefs, who align with their personal beliefs, whatever, right? They vote in those locations. And where do people from UP, Bihar, etc. go? This is not a dig on anyone. Well, they go to states like Maharashtra, where there are actual jobs. As a fun fact, Mumbai and its vicinity might have more businesses compared to all UP, Bihar put together. Now, that is unfortunate fact. What does that give, or what kind of power it gives to politicians? Well, they don't need to care about economics anymore. This is the unfortunate thing that is happening. Then all this transpires to the next point that, okay, what is going to happen to the stock market? Is stock market going to crash? Sab kuch khatam hai? The short answer is no. This is not how things typically work. Now you might consider it to be great news, but for this you need to understand the concept of risk-free return. Now let me show you a very simple calculation कि risk-free return का मतलब क्या होता है? Well, the closest risk-free return we have is on FD money, right? So for example, if you go and do a fixed deposit in, let's say, HDFC Bank, then you are making 7%. But are you really making 7%? Well, 2-3 things are working against you. Number one is taxation, that now FD rates are taxed at slab. So if you are a rich person with dispensable income to do FDs in the first place, chances are that you might be falling in that 30% slab. So अगर आप 7% का 30% कर लो तो 2.1 निकल के आता है, then you are making 4.9% effective returns on your FD. Everyone with me? Next point comes, let's see. The value of INR every single year keeps going down by 4 to 5% in USD terms. That USD appreciates, INR falls. Dirham appreciates, INR falls. So if you add that 5%, right, to this mix, how much effective return are you making by putting your money in fixed deposits or risk-free rate? The short answer is 0. Okay. This is the situation. Now a lot of people will जंप ऑन मी सेइंग कि हमें तो इंडिया में पैसा स्पेंड करना है, हमें क्या फर्क पड़ता है, हम थोड़ी क्यों इंपोर्ट करते हैं. भाई, वी आर अ नेट इंपोर्टर. ओके, यू आर कंज्यूमिंग आईफोन, यू आर कंज्यूमिंग सबवे बर्गर, यू आर कंज्यूमिंग मैकडोनल्ड्स बर्गर, यू आर टेकिंग इंटरनेशनल ट्रिप्स. सम ऑफ यू माइट बी वर्किंग इन इंडिया ट्राइंग टू सेंड योर किड्स टू लाइक व्हाटएवर, लाइक यू नो, फॉरेन यूनिवर्सिटी एंड एक्सेट्रा. सो सबका फर्क आप पे पड़ता है. एट द वेरी लीस्ट, इफ यू आर अ पर्सन विद अ डिस्पेंसिबल इनकम, you are competing for the same set of stocks that an international investor, for example an FII, is competing. What is the situation in other countries? For example, अगर आप UAE की बात करो, okay, so in UAE the FD rates are somewhere around close to 4%, right? And what is the tax on it? 0. Now what is dirham depreciation compared to US dollar? The answer is 0. So what is your effective return? Well, it's 4%. So this is the concept of risk-free rate that you need to understand. Now comes the next point. Okay, fine, I understand this. Now how is it that the stock market is connected to this? Well, the very reason that people go to the stock market in the first place is to beat risk-free return. Simple सा example ये आता है कि even if you are getting like 12% in FDs effectively, and in the stock market also you are going to make like 12%, why would you risk your money or capital in purchasing equity? Because market, there is a risk, there is a higher risk. But situation in India is what? That we assume that the markets or Nifty is going to give you 12 to 13% returns. यहाँ पे भी ये गेम खेला जाएगा, राइट? कि फॉर एग्जाम्पल टैक्स कर दो आप 30%, ओके, इसमें उसके बाद आफ्टर टैक्स होगा. जो आपका INR depreciation है, that will increase with time. So as a result, what will happen is that your effective real returns are going to fall considerably even in the stock market. We'll be very happy कि हमें baseline return or headline return we are getting like 12, 13%, 14%, 15%, or this, that stuff. But people don't understand this mix. Okay, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just simply sharing the reality. So to cut the long story short, how is the stock market going to get impacted due to weakening of the economy or weakening of the fundamentals of the economy? It's very simple that number one, your taxation is going to increase. We are already working. There is already something called as direct tax code, which is likely to be levied, right? So this will increase the LTCG and STCG on equities as well. So यहाँ से आपका कम होगा. Baseline return आपको 12-13% मिलता रहेगा, right? On Nifty, if you go to small cap, mid cap, ज़्यादा पैसा बनेगा. And on top of that, the INR depreciation, which happens due to rise in inflation, वो भी आपका होता रहेगा, right? So as a result, your real return from the stock market will fall. You'll see a lot of volatility. You'll have to take higher and higher risk in order to make money from the stock market. This will be the reality. Now, some of you will turn around. You'll say that you're trying to scare us. You have no access to data. You're just conjecturing and whatnot. Can you like speak sensibly? Okay, so let me ask you a very basic question, which brings us to the next point, that why did RBI not cut interest rates up until now? That's a very interesting question to answer, because the US government has cut interest rates already. Europeans have cut interest rates already. Majority of the world has cut interest rates already. Why is it that Indian government is not cutting interest rates? Well, the answer is very simple. That right now, the inflation that you see in the economy is close to 10% realistically speaking. If you are anyone who has any kind of disposable income. Now, if RBI were to have cut the interest rate too soon, there will be an escalation in this number. अभी तो officially वो बताते रहते हैं कि 6% inflation है, 6% inflation है. That's the average inflation across India. If you're living in Bangalore, if you're living in Delhi, if you're living in Mumbai, then for you the inflation is 10% already, right? So this number will get hit very badly if Indian government cuts the interest rate way too fast. So they have been prudent. That's actually a good step taken by the RBI not to cut interest rate too fast. But this needs to be supported by something called as gross capital formation, which means, for example, here is a chart and you can take a look at it. This explains government spending by the Indian government on each year basis. You will see a sudden spike from the year 2020 to 2021. Why? Because in 2020, the interest rates were very low and Indian government borrowed a lot of money. They were supposed to spend this money sensibly, not as if कि build नया parliament बना देते हैं, भव्य कर देते हैं सब कुछ. That's not gross capital formation. Gross capital formation means that, okay, fine, you have raised like money, you have borrowed more money. Now go and spend in a way that actually increase your income stream, that actually allows you to create some real assets. Do not waste that money. I was one of the earlier people who tweeted about कि भाई नहीं बननी चाहिए मूर्तियाँ. There is much more useful work to be done with that money. Why unnecessarily waste it? But no, भाई tourism आएगा, economy बढ़ जाएगी, दिखा दो economy कहाँ बढ़ गई, right? को we are having like 5.4% GDP growth rate. अगर that statue building say economy was improving, then why is economy not improving? So that's a very simple basic question to ask now. So now comes the final point that this is the reality. To quote जीतू भैया, ये हमारा सत्य है, right? कि यही situation है, right? What is it that you can typically do? Number one, unfortunately, you will have to learn how to take higher risk in the stock market. Nothing can be done if you want to make any kind of sensible returns. That's number one. Number two, please be diversified. It's extremely critical because all kind of investments are going to have massive volatility because the fundamentals of the economy is not that strong. And honestly, we are not on that right kind of a track. Third and finally, please have some kind of hard assets. Hard assets mean gold, land, actual real estate. So hedge your portfolio, have like higher risk things in the stock market, possibly where you're targeting a higher growth rate, and at the same time balance it out by having real hard assets in physical format, so to say. Okay, so मैं यहीं आपको इतनी hint दे सकता हूँ and balance it out by having a diversified portfolio. So in case you guys are interested in economics, finance, I do run a member YouTube community. You guys can consider checking it out. It's a community of very serious learners where we have serious discussions. So in case you are interested, do sign up. I'll put the link in the description and comment box. But I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the reality of Indian economy and it gives you a sense how to position your portfolio. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you soon.